I never thought my decision to become a night shift bus driver in Chicago would open up a gateway to unending horror. I chose this job simply because it was the only one that fit my schedule after my daytime classes. I was in need of the extra income to make ends meet. My shift started at 11 in the evening, as it always did. One particular night, as I was driving my usual route, I noticed an old woman waiting at the bus stop near Michigan Avenue. The sight of her was unusual because she was alone, and at that hour, Michigan Avenue was usually empty. The woman wore an old, tattered shawl wrapped tightly around her thin frame. Her face was almost hidden under her wide-brimmed hat. I stopped the bus and opened the door for her. Once settled in a seat at the back, she stayed quiet, her gaze fixated outside the window. Over the next few nights, the old woman became a regular. She was always waiting at the same stop, and always sat in the back. There was something about her that felt unsettling, but I dismissed it as the creepiness that comes with the night. One night, the weather turned bad, with snowfall making the roads slick and visibility almost zero. I was surprised to find the old woman at her usual stop, undeterred by the harsh weather. Concerned, I asked her where she was going, but she gave no answer. She just moved to the back of the bus as usual. The streets were nearly deserted because of the snowstorm. That's when it started, the knocking. It was a faint, rhythmic knock coming from the back of the bus, like a code being tapped out. I looked into the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the old woman, her back to me, still staring out the window. The knocking continued, growing louder. It seemed to coincide eerily with my heartbeat, making my skin crawl. I wanted to confront the woman about the knocking, but something held me back. I was alone in a moving bus with her, in the middle of a snowstorm. Then, abruptly, the knocking stopped, and a cold silence filled the bus. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. But the relief was short-lived. I heard a sound again. Not a knock this time, but a voice. A soft, fragile voice, humming an unfamiliar tune. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The old woman was still facing the window, her body swaying slightly to the rhythm of her song. The song, the snowfall, and the old woman together painted a chilling scene. As I approached the final stop, a sense of dread washed over me. Something about the humming and the solitary woman didn't feel right. I parked the bus and announced over the speaker, "End of the line, ma'am." The humming stopped. There was a silence that felt heavier than the night itself. Her eyes were pitch black, devoid of any emotion. She smiled, her lips pulling back to reveal teeth that were unnaturally sharp. "I know it's the end of the line, dear. I've been waiting for this," she said. I watched in horror as she moved slowly down the aisle. She stopped in front of me, her inky black eyes boring into mine. She tilted her head and whispered, "It's time." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I was paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, she let out a gut-wrenching scream, so loud it pierced the silence of the night. Her form started to blur and distort, her body fading into a ghostly silhouette. Then, she was gone. The only evidence she was ever there was the ice-cold air and the lingering echo of her scream. I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to process what I had just witnessed. I knew then that my nights as a bus driver were forever going to be haunted by this experience. I was relieved when dawn broke. As I navigated the bus back to the depot, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What was that woman? A ghost? A figment of my imagination, perhaps? I parked the bus and walked to the shift manager's office, my mind still wrestling with the experience of the night. "Rough night, eh?" the manager said, glancing up from his morning paperwork. I nodded, keeping the night's events to myself. The following night, I was back on the bus, back on the same route. But the night passed uneventfully. Weeks turned into months, and the memory of the ghostly encounter began to fade. For the past 3 years or so, I've worked as an overnight security guard at a mall. It used to be that the mall didn't require an overnight person, but vandalism started to become a problem. Most of the time, I would drive around the parking lot all night listening to my car radio. Maybe 3 months in, I experienced something a little bit stranger. I noticed that the light to one of the shops was on while driving around the parking lot. This was surprising to me, considering no one had snuck past me as of yet. So of course I parked the car and headed inside the mall to catch the potential thieves. As I approached the shop, I didn't hear the sound of anyone rummaging through the inventory. Sure enough, the shop was empty. As a matter of fact, even the security gate was still down. Only the shop owners had access to the security gates, so I couldn't really do anything about the light being on. I headed back out to my car. I'd say an hour went by with no incident, but as I was circling around to the entrance of the mall, I saw another light was on inside. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself. The light was onto the shop, but the security gate was still closed. I heard a click from behind me while investigating. The previous light was no longer on. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, but I swear I saw someone run behind the counter and hide. I shined my flashlight into the shop and scanned the area. Nothing that I could see. Behind me was another click. Once again, the light to the shop was off, and this time, I know I saw someone standing in there. "Hey, you can either leave with me, or you can leave with the police. Your choice," I yelled to the person. They didn't move, just stood next to the light switch. I approached the gate and turned my light in the direction of the light switch. There was no one standing there. I was pretty spooked from the events of that night, but after a few months they were pretty much out of my mind. I think the next incident happened around my 1-year anniversary as a guard. It was winter and I was inside of the mall checking the pipes. Yeah, I was on security duty, but the owners decided to save a buck by having me inspect certain things as well. Whatever. I was heading to one of the bathrooms to relieve myself when I heard a toilet flush. I jumped a little more than I would like to admit. Inside of the bathroom, I didn't see anyone. The toilets in the mall were motion activated, much like every other mall in the world. I checked all of the stalls, empty. But after checking the stalls, I took a seat in one of them. I had a YouTube video playing on my phone while I was sitting. Then I heard a tapping sound coming from the stall next to me. It was subtle and very quiet. I glanced to my left and saw a pair of shoes standing with the toes pointing towards me. Slowly, I brought my eyes up above the stall. Sure enough, there was the tallest man I had ever seen standing over the stall staring down at me. Had I not already been on the toilet, I would have been running home for new pants. When he saw me notice him, he ducked back beneath the stall. I hopped up and kicked in the door to the neighboring stall. The damn thing was empty, except for a pair of shoes sitting in the same spot I had seen them. My heart was thumping like crazy. I went back to my car as quickly as possible after that. If I remember correctly, this happened at around 4 in the morning. I accredited it to my lack of sleep. I was just happy that I had the next day off. It was already a long night. I was driving down a straight stretch of road going back home after a long night shift at work. As I went to turn right on the upcoming crossway, my headlights caught something. I stopped my car and looked out my window. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing baggy jeans and what looks like a green army coat. "Hey, need a ride?" I yelled at him. He turned his head toward my car and smiled. He went around to the passenger side and got in. "Thanks, it was getting chilly out there," he said as he smiles at me and holds out his hand. "Greg Stone at your service." I smiled back and shook Greg's hand. "John Warner." Greg lets go of my hand and looks out the driver window. "Nice to meet you, John. Do you mind if I ask you to take me somewhere?" I guess he forgot that would be the reason why I let him in. "Sure, where you heading?" He coughed and then said, "A couple more miles down the road." I thought that seemed fair enough, since my house was in that general direction. As we were driving, Greg made small talk. I learned how he was a businessman who got down on his luck and turned homeless. He had no good relationship with his family, so they didn't help him out. "That's why I always say to people to keep family members close," he says as he sighs. "We're here." I stopped the car and look at the house we stopped at. It looked like just your normal 2-story house, except with the gnomes and flowers in the front yard. "You mind waiting on me for a second?" Greg asked. This isn't no drug dealer's house, is it?" I asked, because why would a homeless guy be wanting in someone's house? He looked at me with a shocked face, then laughed. No, that's funny. This is just an old friend of mine's place. Just wanted to see how he is doing. This will only take a couple minutes, promise." With that, he went out of the car and up towards the driveway. I watched him knock on the door several times until it opened. I couldn't see who opened it, but Greg went inside nonetheless. As I waited, I noticed the lights that were on in the house flashing on and off several times. Then, all at once, the lights turned off. Greg opened the front door and shut it, then headed straight to my car. As he got in, I asked, "So what happened?" Greg turned with a serious face and said, "That's personal, nothing else." I just shut my mouth and started up the road. "Mind if I ask you to take me back to where you found me?" I was going to Gladdy because Greg was already starting to creep me the hell out. I didn't say it to him, so I just drove along to end us on friendly terms. As we go back to the crossroad, Greg starts to get out of the vehicle. As he gets out, he shuts the door, then looks at me through the open passenger window. "Since you were nice to me, John, I'll let you ask me one question." "One question?" I thought in my head, confused by what he meant. Only one thing that bothered me was what happened at that person's house with the lights. "What happened up there at that house?" I asked him. He sighed as if I asked him something he didn't want to say. "That person you dropped me off at made a deal with me. He broke that deal, so I took care of him." "Took care of him? So you killed him?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Yes." Suddenly it seemed as if his whole entire body was shaking. Suddenly I was seeing a mix of Greg and a horrifying creature with horns all around its body. What are you?" "I'm something not from this material plane, John. Now that you've seen my form, you made a deal with me yourself. The next time someone picks me up, I'll be coming for you like you did to that other." My heart was beating really fast. Sweat was pouring down my eyebrows. "I can't wait till we meet again." Suddenly the creature was just gone. I quickly sped out of there as fast as I could.